Hello and welcome to this video. Do you know the simple mistakes that can instantly destroy your multimeter or give you completely wrong measurement results? Hi, my name is Markus, and in this video we are going to talk about the 5 most common mistakes people do when measuring with a multimeter and how to avoid these mistakes. A multimeter is one of the most important tools in electronics and electrical work, but using a multimeter incorrectly can lead to wrong results, damaged equipment, or even safety risks. So let's jump right in and start with the first mistake, and this is selecting the wrong measurement mode or the wrong measuring range. If you choose the wrong range, this can lead to incorrect readings or even blow the fuse in the multimeter. So you have to be especially careful before you start the measurement to select the right mode in the right measuring range. For example, if you want to measure current but select the voltage measurement range, you can instantly destroy the fuse in the multimeter, so be careful with that. And you always have to start with the highest range, especially if you don't know what the reading or the value of the measurement will be. Start with the highest range, and if this is not precise enough, step down and then you get a more precise reading. For example, for this multimeter, the test probes and the sockets are colored, so it's a little bit more easy. The black test lead always is connected to the black socket, the COM terminal. And with the red test lead and the dial, you choose what measuring you want to do. In the example, we wanted to do a current measurement. So I'm connecting it in this test lead. And now if I'm turning on the multimeter and choose the wrong measuring mode, for example, volt, you see that I get a warning. You have seen that I got a warning and a warning sound also. This is not the case for every multimeter. If you have a multimeter which is a little bit more expensive, you may have this warning sound also. But if you don't, you have to be especially careful when choosing the measuring mode. And if you have a multimeter without an auto range function, you have to always start with the highest range. In this example, if you want to measure voltage, you have to start with volts. And if this measurement range is too high, you can step down to millivolts. And this is also the case for current measurement. If you want to measure current, you start with the highest range, in this example, ampere. And if this range is also too high, you can step down to milliampere or even microampere. If this sounds too complicated, you can check out my online course on how to take measurements with the multimeter. You can find it in the video description below. But now let's go to the next mistake, and this is a wrong connection of the test leads. I just showed you before that you have to be careful when connecting the test leads. So first of all, you will choose the correct measuring mode and measuring range, and then you connect the test leads, and this has to fit to your chosen measurement. So if you plug the test leads in the wrong socket, in the best case, you get a warning sound, but in the worst case, you destroy the fuse in the multimeter. This is especially important for current measurements. So in this multimeter, you have 2 sockets for current measurements that are fused, and you can see how they are fused on this line. With the left socket, you can measure up to 10 amps for a maximum of 10 seconds. And after that, you have to wait 10 minutes for the fuse and the multimeter to cool down. And on the right terminal, you even are only allowed to measure up to 400 milliamps. So be careful when taking the measurements to stay below that limit. The next common mistake is to measure components in a circuit and especially resistors. I have made a separate video on why this is a bad idea to measure resistors in a circuit. And in this video, I'm explaining in detail why this results in a false reading. So if you want to measure resistors and cannot read the marks on the resistor, you have to take them out of the circuit to be able to do a correct measurement. At least you have to disconnect one of the connections of the resistor, so the measuring current only flows through the one resistor you want to measure. And after that, you have to put it back into the circuit. But it is even better if you take the whole resistor out of the circuit. So no matter what you do, never measure a resistor in a circuit, because you almost always get a false reading and not the exact value of the resistor. The next common mistake is that you can be unsure how to connect the multimeter to the circuit, for example, in voltage or current measurements. If you want to measure current, you always have to disconnect the circuit and connect the multimeter in series, so the current flows through the multimeter. And if you want to measure voltage, the multimeter has to be connected in parallel. Like I said before, if you want to measure voltage but connect the multimeter in series, this can instantly destroy the fuse in your multimeter, and for the measurement you get no reading. And this can be very dangerous because it leads to the false assumption that you have a faulty circuit and that there is no current flowing in the circuit. And if you believe this measurement, it can be very dangerous if you touch the circuit, so you can get an electric shock. So before you do the measurement, always make sure that the fuse in the multimeter is working and that you can get a correct reading, and that you don't switch series and parallel connections depending on what you want to measure. The last common mistake is especially important if you want to measure the capacitance of capacitors, because one of the main functions of the capacitor is to store electrical energy, and the energy that is stored in a capacitor can be still there even after you remove the power of the circuit. So if you touch a capacitor that is not fully discharged, this can lead to an electric shock, which can be very dangerous depending on the size of the capacitor and the amount of stored energy inside. The stored energy also can destroy the multimeter, and in the best case you only get some false measurements. So to avoid all of this, you always have to discharge the capacitor before measurement, and you can do that, for example, with a resistor, but please make sure that you don't touch the capacitor when you are using a resistor to discharge it. So these are the most common mistakes people do when measuring with a multimeter. Do you know any other mistakes people do when measuring with a multimeter? Then please leave a comment. And if you now want to really master multimeter measurements and avoid costly mistakes, you can check out the online course I have linked in the video description below, where I guide you through real practical measurements step by step. So I hope to see you there.